Hello! So, I think it's safe to say that recently a certain game has taken people by storm. That game being Hades. I'm also really in love with the game at the moment. The gameplay is fantastic, the character designs are phenomenal, the voice acting and dialogue is spectacular, and the story itself is extremely solid. I'm really enjoying it. It took me 32 attempts to get to the final boss, please don't judge me, but it is a very enjoyable game. However, before I bought the game, there was a Twitter thread going around that was comparing the character designs of the webcomic lore Olympus to Hades, and was effectively dunking on the comic and even the author herself, saying that they look lazy and that it was problematic and doesn't deserve to be as popular as it is. Believe it or not, that was also my first exposure to the Hades game, so seeing its fans shit on another franchise via comparison wasn't exactly the best first impression, no matter how good it was. Lore Olympus has its own set of issues, and I will link some reviews of the comic from fellow YouTubers in the description. However, I personally don't believe that it deserves as much hate as it gets. When I finally bought Hades, surprise surprise, despite how much I grew to love the game, my opinion did not magically change. So I wanted to talk about this and why I think it's unfair to compare the two, given their specified mediums and purposes. I'm not going to be reviewing or outright critiquing either series, but I will be highlighting certain aspects and differences that I deem to be important to the discussion. If you like what you're hearing, please consider liking and subscribing. I'm still fairly new to all this, but any and all support will be dearly appreciated. Alright, let's do this. So, let's begin with the main premise of these two franchises. Hades is a game released in December of 2018 by Supergiant Games, in which you play as Zagreus, the son of Hades, as he battles his way through the underworld because he's sick of his dad and wants to leave home. You advance through the underworld by choosing from a range of unlockable weapons, as well as receiving help from the gods on Olympus in the form of boons that help you enhance things like your attacks and attributes. However, once you die during an escape attempt, you emerge from the river Styx back at the House of Hades and can interact with a varied cast of characters, such as Hypnos, Achilles, Nyx, as well as others that will turn up at the house after you either defeat, encounter, or unlock them. By contrast, Lore Olympus is a webcomic made by Rachel Smythe, available to read on Webtoon, that was first launched in March of 2018, and is a modern-day adaptation of The Kidnapping of Persephone. The webcomic touches on a variety of stories and anecdotes from the original Greek mythos. However, being that it is a modern adaptation, there are some obvious liberties that have been taken. It also features some very sensitive topics such as trauma and sexual assault, so naturally, reader discretion is advised. Now, right off the bat, there are some obvious differences between the two, the main being that they are designed for two completely different platforms and audiences. Hades is designed to be a game that exhilarates you and caters to those who are more interested in action and strategy, whereas Lore Olympus is a more casual series that is released on a platform suited for a relaxed reading experience. There's also a notable gender difference between the two. Hades is a hack and slash commonly geared towards boys, and Lore Olympus is a love story geared more towards girls. That is a very simplified explanation, but I can't help but think that this was an aspect that was also unfairly leveraged against Lore Olympus, but I'll touch more on that later in the video. As someone who works both on my own webcomic and also worked on character sprites for a game which unfortunately didn't go ahead because of writing issues, I can tell you that the work involved and the way you go about the two are just on completely separate planets. What I mean by this is that despite the quote-unquote simplistic art style and direction, Lore Olympus takes much more work to produce than Hades did, so let's break that down. For one, Hades has not only an entire team, but also a dedicated company behind it. Supergiant Games' team consists of around 18 people who helped develop the game and, from my understanding, dedicated all of their time to it during its production. Lore Olympus has around 5 people on the team, including Rachel herself, and while it is one of, if not the most popular webcomics on the internet currently, Line Webtoon has a slew of other titles that it promotes and dedicates time and funding to, despite Lore Olympus seemingly hogging a lot of that spotlight. Rachel Smythe is probably well paid and receives special treatment, sure, but is that really a reason for her to get shat on by people? Plus, in terms of her team, artists very seldom only have one project going on, so the amount of work that her assistants do for the comic is probably a bit more staggered than people realise, since they probably also have stuff like Patreon and personal projects happening alongside their work on Lore Olympus itself. Taking a look at assets like sprites, panels, and the like, something I noticed about the character sprites in Hades is that despite the fact that they are indeed gorgeous, there are very few of them per character and they hardly move, if at all. This is understandable given the level of detail in them, so I'm not going to fault them for that, but if you look closely, the most movement is generally either a head turn or a very subtle change in facial expression. The character with the most sprites, to my surprise, was actually Persephone, followed by both Zagreus and Hades, who both have 4. It looks very much like the sprites were copy and pasted with just a few new face layers on top. That's not a bad thing, by the way, it's actually very efficient and it's what I and other sprite artists do as well. Lore Olympus, by contrast, however, even though the characters are often monochromatic and lack a lot of the more detailed design elements, the characters' bodies still take time to draw because they're not copy-pasted. They still have a degree of shading, as well as a wide variation in poses, which is something that Hades sprites lack. And the reason for this is, again, the difference in medium. Hades most likely had a lot of time to create a sprite that would be viewed almost every time dialogue happens, whereas each drawing in Lore Olympus will be viewed once, and a good portion will often get skimmed over entirely. You don't see hyper-realistic drawing and shading in a 2D animation, whether it be Peppa Pig or Disney, for the exact same reason. Lore Olympus updates every week, so to expect Hades' level of detail in characters and backgrounds is just unrealistic, and it appears to come from a severe misunderstanding of how games and webcomics alike operate. Looking at one of the most recent pages, there is a grand total of 61 panels in a single upload. For reference, my most recent upload has 15, and I only update every 2 weeks to account for other obligations, and even then, I tend to sometimes miss upload deadlines because of workload. 61 panels is a lot of work for 5 people to do on a weekly basis. Even with a large buffer of pages, they still have fastpass readers and probably a quota from Webtoon to account for. I've been a fan of numerous beautiful and well-drawn comics, however, because of the level of detail, these comics tend to have very long breaks between uploads, which is extremely poisonous in terms of retaining readers. There's a certain degree of nuance and streamlining involved in order to make these works feasible, and Lore Olympus shouldn't be crucified for that just because it's popular, and that leads into my next part of the video. So, looping back to the original tweet, people seem to be taking it as an excuse to just shit all over Lore Olympus's story and Rachel herself, not just the character designs. And I have to say, more than anything, this is just very immature. I noticed a small percentage of people mentioning that the themes explored and spoken of in Lore Olympus should not be, and I can't help but feel a little apprehensive of that. What I will agree with, however, is that the age rating for the comic should be put up to at least 16. This comic should not be PG-13, that is definitely a blunder. Despite that though, just because a story touches on something you don't like, or it's a subject that you deem uncomfortable, that doesn't mean that it can't be explored or discussed in fiction and media. In fact, it's extremely important that we do so in order to accommodate or bring comfort and solidarity to those who have also faced similar circumstance. Art and media is meant to be an outlet, and it's more than a bit polarizing to see people misunderstand that. Of course you can criticize things, but outright picking things apart without offering a way to reconstruct them is not how that works. People cope with things in different ways, and it's really not hard for people to look away if it is something they genuinely can't face. A creator I'm a fan of has a webcomic centered around body image, and even though I support them in creating it, I physically can't read it because of my own issues. However, it could also be likely that the creator also has these issues and the comic is their way of working through it. And I think this is the problem with people's perception of quote-unquote problematic works. They view it from a surface level and don't seem to question why the creator felt the need to explore these themes in an empathetic manner, instead lumping them in with people who do in fact create things that are explicitly harmful or even illegal. The irony also isn't lost on me that people are scandalized about complicated themes being involved in a story to do with Greek gods. You know, the ones where the king of gods cheated on his wife regularly and even had children with animals and his own offspring. Just thought I'd throw that in. I also can't help but be a bit suspicious that whenever something like this comes up, the topic that is being torn to shreds is more often than not something that caters to a female or generally marginalised audience. As if comics like The Killing Joke don't exist, which don't nearly get as much flack, and when it does get criticism, it's almost always rationalised in a way that female-oriented media just isn't. Which is also, in the context of Hades, a tiny bit hypocritical, since one of the themes of the game is that Hades himself can be viewed as abusive towards his son, not allowing him to leave the underworld, sending Shades to kill him during escape attempts, and not even telling Zagreus about his mother. While yes, there is the option to resolve this tenuous relationship in the game, and Lore Olympus has a bit more of a rap sheet for questionable story decisions and depictions of characters like Persephone, I still feel that this is something that people should learn to take with a bit of salt and try to gain a broader perspective of. All in all, stop trying to compare things that are nothing alike. Literally, the only thing these two have in common is the original source material, and that material is already problematic to begin with. And I don't just mean in the context of these two franchises either. People these days seem to have a really bad habit of comparing things that often don't have much, if anything, in common to compare in the first place. To quote Creepshow Art, this whole thing is kind of bonkers. Anyway, that's my art rant for the week done. Please let me know of any thoughts or additions you have in the comments. Games and webcomics come with their own challenges, and the themes of certain stories and how they are presented can result in gigantic differences in audience and perspective. I hope that any of you reading can at least take that away from this if nothing else. Before I sign off, here is a piece from the new art prompt challenges that I'll be hosting in the Discord. If you're interested in having your art featured in both my videos and comic updates, please take part in the art prompt challenge of the week and use the checkmark emoji to show me that you consent to having your art featured. Thank you for watching, and please like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. Please stay safe everyone. Bye!